When you don't react anymore, the first thing she feels is not loss, it's confusion. Not the dramatic kind, but the quiet, unsettling kind that sits in the chest and won't resolve itself. She was used to your responses anchoring her emotional world. Your reactions confirmed impact. They told her she mattered, that her words carried weight, that her moods could move you. When that feedback loop disappears, her internal sense of control wavers, not because she owned you, but because she relied on your emotional responsiveness to regulate her own state. What unsettles her most is that nothing happened. There was no argument, no explosion, no final speech. You simply stopped reacting, and that absence feels louder than confrontation ever did. When you don't react, she can't label you as angry, needy, insecure, or immature. There's no emotional handle to grab onto. And without that handle, she can't place you neatly into a story where she understands her role. Silence destabilizes narrative. At first, she tells herself you're just calm. Then she wonders if you're suppressing something. Then she wonders if you've detached emotionally. That's when unease sets in. Because detachment is not something she can negotiate with. Emotions can be argued with. Silence cannot. And the moment she realizes she no longer has influence over your internal state, she feels exposed in a way she didn't expect. When you stop reacting, she loses contrast. Before, her highs and lows had something to bounce off. Your reactions gave shape to her emotions. Now there's nothing to amplify against. And without amplification, feelings lose intensity. That's when restlessness appears. She may poke subtly, change tone, test boundaries, bring up old topics, not to start conflict, but to see if you're still there emotionally, to see if you still move. If you don't take the bait, a deeper discomfort emerges, self-awareness. When your reactions disappear, her behavior stands alone. There's no longer a distraction, no emotional smokescreen. She starts feeling her own actions more clearly, and clarity is uncomfortable when it removes justification. This is often the moment when she feels off but can't explain why. The mirror is too clean. What she does not feel is relief. Indifference from you doesn't feel neutral, it feels destabilizing. Because indifference signals that you are no longer emotionally dependent, and emotional independence is threatening to anyone who is used to being the emotional center of the dynamic. She may tell herself you're distant or cold, but what she's actually sensing is that she no longer has leverage. As time passes, she starts revisiting moments where she assumed you'd always react. She replays conversations. She notices things she overlooked, not because she suddenly values you more, but because the absence of reaction forces re-evaluation. Attention that disappears doesn't feel like loss at first. It feels like imbalance, and imbalance demands resolution. This is when her emotions begin to swing inward instead of outward. Instead of expressing, she reflects. Instead of provoking, she wonders. And wondering is dangerous territory because it's where doubt grows. Doubt about her position, doubt about how much she mattered, doubt about whether she misjudged your availability, and doubt erodes certainty, the one thing she relied on without realizing it. What she feels most deeply, though she may never articulate it, is a loss of emotional gravity. She was used to being the emotional sun in the dynamic, with you orbiting. When you stop reacting, the center shifts. And when the center shifts without warning, it creates a subtle panic. Not loud, not dramatic, but persistent, because she no longer knows where she stands. And here is the truth. Most men never understand. When you don't react anymore, she doesn't feel punished. She feels revealed. Revealed to herself. Exposed to the reality that your attention was a choice, not a guarantee. That your emotional presence was offered, not owned. And once that realization settles in, the dynamic can never fully return to what it was, because she now knows what it feels like when you are no longer emotionally reachable. After confusion settles in, anxiety quietly takes its place. Not the obvious kind, no panic, no meltdown, but a low-level tension that hums in the background of her thoughts. She starts checking patterns, timing, your energy, your availability, not obsessively at first, but instinctively, because when emotional certainty disappears, the nervous system looks for new reference points, and when you no longer provide them, she has to confront the unfamiliar sensation of not knowing where she stands. This is when she begins to feel the absence more acutely, not because she misses you emotionally yet, but because the dynamic is gone, the predictable push and pull, the reactions she could rely on, the emotional rhythm that made her feel oriented. Without your reactions, there's no feedback. And without feedback, the mind starts filling gaps. She wonders if she misread you, if she took something for granted, if you're further gone than she assumed. What unsettles her most is that your lack of reaction feels intentional, even if it isn't. Silence carries intent, calm carries confidence, and confidence, when it appears suddenly, forces re-evaluation. She starts asking questions she never asked before, not about you, but about herself. Was she careless? Was she too certain? Did she push too far? And those questions don't come from guilt, they come from destabilization. At this stage, she may attempt subtle reconnection, not direct, not vulnerable, something light, casual, a message that doesn't reveal intent, but checks temperature, because what she wants most is reassurance that you're still emotionally accessible, that she can still reach you if she needs to. If you remain neutral, present but unmoved, the discomfort deepens. Neutrality is harder to interpret than rejection. When you don't react, she loses her ability to predict you, and unpredictability, when it comes from emotional independence, feels threatening. Not because she fears you, but because she no longer understands the rules of engagement. She was operating in a familiar system. You stepped out of it, and systems resist collapse. They try to reassert order. This is when she may reinterpret the past, not to rewrite you, but to reframe herself. She starts questioning whether she was as significant to you as she believed, whether the power dynamic she assumed existed actually did. And this is a deeply uncomfortable place because it introduces doubt into her self-perception. Your lack of reaction becomes a mirror she didn't ask to look into. If she senses that your non-reaction is not a tactic, but a genuine shift, something deeper stirs. Loss of emotional influence, not love. Influence. And influence matters more than affection in the early stages of detachment, because affection can fade quietly, but influence disappearing signals a change in hierarchy. And hierarchy shifts are felt viscerally, even if they aren't consciously understood. She may oscillate between minimizing your absence and magnifying it. One moment she tells herself, you were never that important. The next, she feels unsettled by how little she seems to affect you now. This back and forth is not about you, it's about regaining internal equilibrium. Your reaction used to help regulate that equilibrium. Now she has to do it alone. What she doesn't realize yet is that your non-reaction has changed the emotional rules permanently. Even if you were to re-engage later, the certainty she once felt would be gone. She has tasted what it feels like when you are no longer emotionally reactive, and that memory lingers. It creates caution, awareness, a sense that access is no longer guaranteed. And this is the quiet turning point, when she stops feeling in control of the dynamic and starts feeling accountable to it, not because you demanded anything, but because your stillness forced reflection. You didn't punish, you didn't withdraw aggressively, you simply removed emotional fuel, and without fuel the fire no longer behaves the same way. When anxiety can no longer be resolved through reassurance, it begins to transform. It doesn't disappear, it redirects. This is where her emotions split in two possible directions, attraction or withdrawal, and which path she takes depends entirely on how she interprets your stillness. If your non-reaction feels grounded, self-directed, and emotionally contained, attraction quietly ignites, because emotional independence is rare, and rarity triggers curiosity. But if your stillness feels empty or resentful, she withdraws. The difference is subtle, but she feels it instinctively. If attraction emerges, it does so slowly and internally. There is no immediate confession, no dramatic realization, just a growing awareness that you are no longer easily accessible. That awareness reframes your value. She starts noticing things she previously overlooked, not because you changed, but because her reference point did. What was once familiar now feels distant, and distance reshapes desire. Familiarity breeds comfort, distance reintroduces mystery. This is when she may begin to think about you, unprompted, not obsessively, but unexpectedly. Moments where your absence feels louder than your presence ever did, not because she misses interaction, but because she misses influence. Influence over your emotional state, and realizing she no longer has it creates a subtle ache, not longing yet, but awareness, and awareness is the seed of renewed attraction. At the same time, she may feel an urge to reassert connection, not dramatically, but strategically. She might increase warmth, offer light validation, mirror your calm, not to manipulate, but to restore balance, to see if the emotional door is still unlocked. If you respond with grounded neutrality, neither cold nor eager, the attraction deepens, because she senses that access now requires alignment, not impulse. If withdrawal is the path she takes instead, it doesn't come from strength, it comes from discomfort. Some people retreat when they lose emotional leverage. They distance themselves to regain internal control. In this case, she tells herself you were never important, that the connection was shallow, that your non-reaction proves indifference. This narrative protects her ego. But even in withdrawal, something lingers, because certainty was interrupted, and certainty rarely returns untouched. What's critical to understand is that both attraction and withdrawal are responses to the same thing: your emotional independence. You didn't chase, you didn't explain, you didn't react, you simply stood still. And standing still while someone expects movement creates a psychological recalibration. She must now adjust to you, rather than you adjusting to her. If attraction grows, it is not driven by fear of loss, it's driven by respect. Respect for your composure, respect for your boundaries, respect for your ability to remain unmoved without becoming distant. This respect is quiet. It doesn't announce itself, but it changes how she approaches you. There is more care, more awareness, more consideration, because she knows now that emotional access is not guaranteed. If withdrawal continues, it is often accompanied by a subtle defensiveness. She may become dismissive, detached, emotionally flat. This is not closure, it's containment, a way to avoid confronting the discomfort your non-reaction created. But even then, the dynamic has shifted. She knows now that you are capable of detaching without chaos, and that knowledge stays with her, even if she walks away. What remains consistent in both outcomes is this: your non-reaction forces her into a position of response, rather than control. She is no longer leading the emotional tempo, she is adjusting to it. An adjustment changes perception, it reframes power, it shifts hierarchy, not aggressively, not visibly, but unmistakably. So when you don't react anymore, you don't push her away or pull her closer by force. You reveal how she handles uncertainty, how she responds when emotional influence disappears, how she behaves when the dynamic no longer bends around her feelings. And whatever she becomes in that moment, attracted, withdrawn, reflective, that is who she truly is, when the emotional noise clears. When respect begins to replace comfort, the dynamic fully shifts. Comfort was built on predictability, on knowing how you'd respond, when you'd respond, and how emotionally available you'd be. Respect, however, is built on uncertainty mixed with stability. She doesn't know what you'll do emotionally anymore, but she senses that whatever you do will come from a grounded place. That combination is unsettling and magnetic at the same time. Comfort lets people relax. Respect makes them pay attention. This is when she starts moderating herself around you, not consciously, not strategically, but instinctively. She becomes more aware of her tone, her words, her emotional fluctuations. Before she could spill emotion freely, knowing you'd absorb it. Now she senses that emotional excess won't land the same way. Your lack of reaction has created a boundary without you ever stating one, and boundaries that are felt, not spoken, are the most powerful kind. Internally, she begins to recalibrate how much access she assumes she has to you. She no longer feels entitled to immediate emotional engagement. She may hesitate before reaching out. She may think twice before venting. This hesitation is not fear, it's respect forming. Respect born from the realization that your emotional presence is not automatic, it is offered, and offers can be withdrawn. At this stage, she may experience a subtle sense of loss, not of you, but of the version of the dynamic where she didn't have to be self-aware, where emotional output required no consideration, where reactions were guaranteed. Losing that ease feels like losing a privilege she didn't know she had, and people rarely notice privileges until they disappear. If attraction is present, it now deepens into something quieter and more serious. She doesn't feel the rush of excitement, she feels gravity. You feel heavier in her mind, more solid, less flexible, and solidity changes how someone values you. You're no longer just emotionally engaging, you're emotionally anchored. Anchors don't chase ships, ships adjust around them. If attraction is absent, she may feel irritation instead, not because you did something wrong, but because your non-reaction removed her ability to frame you emotionally. You're no longer the man who reacts, explains, reassures, or defends. You've become emotionally unreadable, and unreadable people cannot be easily dismissed or categorized. That ambiguity lingers, even if she moves on. One of the most important internal shifts happens here. She stops assuming your availability. Availability is often mistaken for kindness, but it's also a form of emotional exposure. When you remove it without hostility, she learns that access to you is conditional, not on compliance, but on alignment. That realization forces maturity or retreat. There is no middle ground. What she feels next is something few men ever witness directly: recalculation, not manipulation, recalculation. She reassesses how she engages, how she expresses emotion, how she positions herself around you, because dynamics that no longer revolve around her feelings require adaptation, and adaptation is effort. Only people who value the connection will make it. Your non-reaction has now done something irreversible. It has removed emotional complacency. She can no longer coast on certainty. Whether she leans in or steps away, she does so with awareness, and awareness changes behavior. She is no longer interacting with a predictable emotional responder. She is interacting with a man who exists independently of her reactions. This is the final shift. She no longer feels like she has you emotionally. She either earns proximity or she doesn't. And that realization alone changes how she remembers you, even years later, because men who don't react aren't easily forgotten. They don't leave emotional scars, they leave unanswered questions, and unanswered questions linger far longer than arguments ever do. Long after the dynamic has shifted, whether she stayed, leaned in, or walked away, you remain present in her mind in a way that surprises her. Not vividly, not emotionally charged, but unresolved. She remembers that you didn't explode, didn't plead, didn't spiral. She remembers that you stayed calm when she expected reaction, and that calm becomes a reference point. Every man who reacts too much after you quietly reminds her of what she lost access to: emotional steadiness without submission. What lingers most is not nostalgia, but contrast. She compares, not consciously at first, but reflexively. Other men explain themselves too quickly. Other men get defensive. Other men chase reassurance. And in those moments, she feels the absence of your restraint. Your non-reaction didn't create fireworks, but it created a standard. And standards don't fade easily once experienced. Over time, she may even rewrite parts of the story. Not to elevate you, but to make sense of your behavior. Because calm detachment doesn't fit neatly into common narratives. You weren't cold enough to villainize. You weren't emotional enough to dismiss. You existed outside the usual emotional script. And when someone doesn't fit a script, they remain psychologically unfinished. This is when she may feel something like delayed respect. Not admiration in the romantic sense, but recognition. Recognition that you handled yourself differently. That you didn't try to win emotionally. That you didn't lose yourself. And recognition, even when it comes late, carries weight because it reframes the entire interaction retroactively. If she is emotionally mature, this recognition can turn inward. She may question how she handles emotional power, how she reacts when control slips, how she interprets silence. This isn't guilt, it's growth pressure. And growth pressure is uncomfortable. Many people avoid it, but once introduced, it doesn't disappear. If she is not emotionally mature, the memory still remains, but it becomes a quiet irritation. Because your non-reaction denied her a familiar emotional outcome. She didn't get closure through drama. She didn't get resolution through dominance or reassurance. She was left with ambiguity, and ambiguity is harder to discard than certainty. What's important is this: she doesn't remember you as someone who didn't care. She remembers you as someone who didn't need, and needlessness changes how people are remembered. It separates you from the mass of emotionally reactive men who all blend together in hindsight. You become distinct, not louder, not flashier, but heavier in memory. Years later, when she reflects on moments where dynamics shifted without conflict, your presence resurfaces, not because you were perfect, but because you were controlled. You showed her a version of masculinity that wasn't performative. One that didn't argue for power, but embodied it through stillness. That impression ages well. Your non-reaction becomes a silent lesson. One she may never articulate, but one that shapes how she engages emotionally going forward. She learns consciously or not that emotional influence is not guaranteed, that access must be earned, that not every man will bend to emotional pressure, and that knowledge changes her behavior with others, even if she never connects it back to you directly. So when you don't react anymore, you don't just change the moment, you change the memory. You remove yourself from emotional noise and place yourself in emotional contrast. And contrast is powerful, because while reactions fade, restraint echoes. While arguments blur, stillness sharpens. And in the long run, the man who didn't react isn't forgotten. He's remembered differently. Even if she never returns, something fundamental has shifted in how she relates to you internally. Respect settles in, not as admiration, not as longing, but as acknowledgement. She understands on a level deeper than logic that you are not emotionally available for manipulation, confusion, or endless emotional negotiation. And that understanding forces a recalibration. You are no longer categorized as someone she could always move emotionally. You become someone she had to adjust to. That adjustment, even if brief, leaves a permanent imprint. What she feels next is a strange mixture of relief and discomfort. Relief because your non-reaction removed emotional volatility. Discomfort because it removed emotional certainty. Certainty is comforting, even when it's unhealthy. Your stillness denied her the familiar emotional rhythm she once relied on, and once that rhythm is broken, it can't be fully restored. She knows now that emotional access to you is not automatic. It's conditional on alignment, not emotion. This is why she may speak of you differently to others, not dramatically, not bitterly, but carefully. You are no longer reduced to a simple label. She doesn't describe you as weak, needy, or reactive. Instead, she may struggle to describe you at all, because men who don't react don't fit easily into social shorthand, and what cannot be summarized cannot be dismissed. Your absence of reaction also changes how she interprets future conflicts with others. When another man reacts strongly, she feels the contrast immediately. She notices emotional volatility more quickly. She becomes aware of how much emotional reassurance is being demanded. Even if she prefers that dynamic, she can't unsee the difference. And once the difference is seen, it alters perception permanently. If she ever reflects honestly, she recognizes that your non-reaction was not punishment, it was self-possession. You didn't withdraw to gain leverage. You withdrew because you no longer needed to participate emotionally in instability. That distinction matters because manipulation feels hollow over time, but self-possession feels real, and reality, even when it's uncomfortable, commands respect. There may also be moments, quiet, unannounced, where she wonders what would have happened if she had adjusted instead of testing. If she had met your stillness with maturity rather than expectation. These thoughts don't lead to regret necessarily, but they create reflection, and reflection reshapes memory. You become associated not with drama, but with a moment where something could have been different. What's powerful is that you never had to explain any of this. You never said, "This is why I'm not reacting." You never demanded understanding. You simply changed your behavior, and behavior teaches more effectively than words ever could. She didn't hear a lesson. She experienced one, and experiences linger far longer than explanations. In her emotional history, you now occupy a different category. Not the one who fought, not the one who begged, not the one who disappeared angrily, but the one who stayed composed, who didn't collapse, who didn't chase resolution, and that category is rare. It carries weight precisely because it lacks drama. Whether she returns or not becomes irrelevant at this stage, because the real shift wasn't external, it was internal. You reclaimed emotional sovereignty. You proved to yourself that you could remain steady without validation, and that proof changes how you move forever. You no longer fear silence. You no longer fear misinterpretation. You no longer fear losing emotional access to someone who hasn't earned permanence. So when you don't react anymore, you don't just alter her behavior, you redefine your own position in the world. You move from emotional participant to emotional constant, from reactor to reference point. And that position, quiet, grounded, unmoved, is not one that attracts everyone, but it commands respect from those who recognize strength when it isn't announced. And that respect, whether acknowledged or not, endures. In the final emotional aftermath, what settles most deeply is a sense of finality without closure. And that is what makes your non-reaction so powerful. Humans are wired to seek resolution. Arguments end with winners and losers. Breakups end with explanations. Conflicts end with emotional release, but silence offers none of that. Your lack of reaction leaves the chapter unfinished, and unfinished chapters stay open in the mind far longer than dramatic endings ever do. She may tell herself she moved on, she may genuinely believe it, but moving on emotionally is different from integrating an experience. Your non-reaction becomes something she never fully integrates. It sits quietly in the background as a reference point, a moment where her usual emotional tools didn't work. Not because you resisted them aggressively, but because you stepped outside the dynamic altogether. That absence of participation rewrites how power is perceived. What she feels next is something most men never get to witness: delayed humility. Not humiliation, not regret, but humility. The realization that not everyone will bend, react, or respond just because emotion is applied. That realization doesn't break her, it matures her. if she's capable of maturity. And even if she resists it, the lesson is planted. Silence teaches patience. Stillness teaches limits. This is why silence outlives confrontation. Confrontation invites defense. Silence invites introspection. When you don't react, there is no villain to fight, no narrative to cling to, no emotional energy to feed on. She is left alone with her interpretation, and interpretations are far harder to control than conversations. You didn't dominate the situation, you dissolved it, and dissolution removes leverage entirely. Over time, she begins to associate your presence, not with emotional chaos, but with emotional containment. Even in absence, you represent composure, and composure is rare in a world addicted to reaction. That rarity elevates memory. You are no longer remembered for what you said or did, but for how you didn't respond. And non-responses, when they come from strength rather than avoidance, echo longer than any argument ever could. If she encounters you again, months or years later, the dynamic doesn't reset. It resumes from a different level. She approaches with awareness now, caution, respect, because she knows you are capable of disengaging emotionally without collapsing. And once someone knows that about you, they treat you differently, not louder, not warmer, but more carefully. What she never forgets is the moment she realized you were no longer emotionally reactive. That moment marked the end of emotional entitlement. She may never articulate it, but she felt it. And feelings like that don't fade. They rewire expectation. From that point forward, she knows that emotional access must be earned, not assumed. And knowing that changes how she relates, not just to you, but to men in general. Silence doesn't win because it hurts her. Silence wins because it frees you. It removes you from emotional games where the only prize is exhaustion. It reclaims your energy, your time, your center, and that reclamation is felt by others, even when they don't understand it consciously. You don't announce that you've changed. You demonstrate it by no longer reacting. This is why men who master non-reaction are rarely chased loudly, but often remembered deeply. They don't dominate conversations. They don't control narratives. They simply refuse to be moved by what is not aligned, and that refusal creates a psychological boundary that lingers long after interaction ends. You become a reference point for emotional maturity, even if she never uses those words. So when you don't react anymore, understand this. You are not withdrawing, punishing, or playing games. You are stepping into emotional sovereignty. You are choosing clarity over chaos, composure over compulsion, and self-respect over emotional noise. And while not everyone will follow you there, those who recognize strength when it is quiet will never forget the man who stayed still when reaction was expected. As time stretches on, what she feels is not longing in the romantic sense, but a persistent awareness that something about you sits outside the usual emotional economy. Most interactions are transactional, reaction for reaction, emotion for emotion. Yours was not. You stepped out of the exchange entirely, and that absence becomes a benchmark. Every time she encounters emotional excess elsewhere, your restraint reappears as contrast, not idealized, remembered, and memory shaped by contrast doesn't fade, it sharpens. She may never admit this even to herself, but your non-reaction quietly rearranged how she understands influence. Influence used to mean the ability to provoke emotion, to elicit reassurance, to trigger engagement. With you, that definition collapsed. You showed, without declaring, that influence ends where self-possession begins. And once someone witnesses that boundary in real time, they can never fully return to the illusion that emotion alone grants control. There is also a subtle shift in how she experiences her own emotions afterward. She becomes more aware of when feelings seek reaction rather than resolution. She notices the urge to provoke, to test, to confirm presence. Sometimes she resists it, sometimes she doesn't, but the awareness remains, and awareness is irreversible. You didn't teach her through instruction, you taught her through absence. Absence is a harsher teacher, but a lasting one. If she ever attempts to re-enter your life, she does so differently, slower, softer, less assumptive, not because she fears you, but because she respects the boundary your stillness created. She knows now that access to your emotional world is not granted through intensity, it is earned through alignment, and alignment requires effort. That requirement alone filters intent. Only those willing to meet you where you stand will approach. What most men misunderstand is that this effect is not about dominance, it's about finality. You didn't escalate, you didn't retaliate, you didn't plead. You concluded the dynamic internally before it concluded externally, and internal conclusions are the strongest kind. They don't announce themselves, they simply change how you move. And movement, once changed, cannot be argued with. In quiet moments, she may feel something like unfinished business, not with you but with herself. Questions about how she handles certainty, how she interprets silence, how she reacts when control slips without warning. These questions don't always resolve into answers, but they mature perception, and matured perception reshapes future choices, even when it resists acknowledgement. Your non-reaction also protects you from being mythologized incorrectly. You are not the villain, not the victim, not the one who tried too hard or cared too little. You are the man who stayed composed, and composure resists distortion. Stories bend around extremes, stillness remains intact. That integrity in memory is rare and powerful. This is why silence outlasts explanation. Explanations invite rebuttal, silence invites meaning-making, and meaning-making always happens on the other person's terms. You relinquished the urge to control interpretation, and in doing so, you gained permanence. You didn't leave behind words to be argued with. You left behind an experience. Experiences don't debate, they imprint. Eventually the emotional charge dissolves, but the lesson remains. She may forget the details of conversations, the timing, even the context, but she will remember how it felt when you didn't react, how the ground shifted beneath expectation, how certainty vanished without conflict. That feeling becomes a reference point she carries forward, consciously or not. And this is the final truth. When you don't react anymore, you don't disappear. You ascend out of the emotional noise. You stop being a participant in cycles that consume energy without producing growth. You become a boundary others feel rather than cross. And that position, quiet, grounded, unmoved, is not about winning her back or proving anything. It's about choosing yourself so completely that reaction is no longer necessary.